Why is your snake not eating? What's wrong with it? Maybe nothing, or maybe not nothing. Today we're going to talk about reasons why your ball python might be refusing food and some tricky ways to get them to belly up to the feed trough. Welcome to the Green Room. I'm Bob Bledsoe. This is my little girl Evie, who would never think of missing a meal. She would probably eat herself into oblivion if I let her, which is something that I myself have been in danger of doing, as has my brother Kent, who's behind the camera. I do enjoy a good meal. I ate an entire box of Captain Crunch this morning. Delicious. My mouth hurts. Well, you've just been introduced to 3 good eaters. And now let's talk about what you can do if your snake is not a good eater. Hi, baby. Hi. Are you checking me out? Anyway, this is part 2 of a series, probably a 2-part series, maybe a 3, I don't know, we'll see what I think of, on food. You can catch part 1 right up there. And Evie is going to check out my face, and then we're going to talk about food and getting a ball python to eat. You're the sweetest girl. You know that? If you go onto one of the forums like Facebook or whatever, to a ball python forum, and you write in, help, my snake won't eat, what do I do? One of the responses you're going to get a lot of is, it's a ball python, don't worry about it, they go off food sometimes. And it is a ball python, and ball pythons do have a tendency to go off food, but it's not because they're a ball python. There's always a reason for them going off food. And a lot of people hear that, and so they don't look for the reason that their snake went off food. And there could be a very good reason, and it could be a problem. So let's talk about what some of those reasons are. I think I'm going to put her back so that I think I'm going to put a board up here. That's what I'm going to do. I'm figuring this out as I go. I decided I have art supplies. So let's make a list. What are some reasons that your ball python might not be eating? Oh, you're not going to be able to see that. T&H. Temps and humidity. That's the first thing to check. Your ball python will not eat if it's not warm enough for them to digest. And the humidity aids in digestion also. And if they're generally not comfortable because they're too dry, they're not hydrated well enough, or they're feeling too cold, or they're feeling too warm, just uncomfortability in general, uncomfortability. When they're uncomfortable, they're not going to eat. That's the point that I'm trying to make here. Temps and humidity. Check those. Those are easy to fix. 80 on the cool side, 90 on the warm side. Have your humidity between, say, 55 and 80. I like it to be around 70 or 75, just in general. Security. Can you see that? It says security if you can't see it. Security. We talked about this in the last video. It bears mentioning again. When a snake eats, it's extremely vulnerable because just the act of eating makes it completely defenseless. And if it's attacked or anything like that, it can't defend itself with the only thing that it has, which is its mouth and its teeth. So eating food, they've got to feel really secure to decide that they're going to make themselves totally vulnerable like that. So if you don't have enough hides, or if you don't have the right kind of hides, if they just don't like their enclosure, they're not going to eat. This is why a lot of times when you upgrade a ball python from a small enclosure to a bigger one, you're like, oh, I'm going to give them all this great space and they're going to love it. And all of a sudden they stop eating. It's because they don't feel secure enough. So you need good actual hides, not the like half log things that are way open on both sides, because that's not a hiding spot. That's just sort of a little bit of coverage. But they can see totally out the front and totally out the back, and they know that you can too. So you want something that that's an actual hide. Watch this. Here you go, actual hide. They crawl into, they're completely hidden. Also, plants and foliage don't count as a hide. It does count as good cover though, and you want to have that kind of clutter. But if that's all you have and you don't have actual hides, they're probably not going to feel secure enough to eat. So that's really important to look into if your ball python stops eating. This one is shed and illness. I'm lumping those two together because just something physically happening with the snake. I hope you guys can read this because I've taken a lot of time to try to write legibly, and I can't tell with my screen if you can actually read it or not. Shed or illness. If your snake's in shed, it's probably going to refuse food. I shouldn't say probably, but good possibility that it will refuse food in shed. I would say that half of my snakes will still eat when they're in shed, and the other half either won't or sometimes won't. So it's fine to offer your snake food when they're in shed, but good chance that they'll skip a meal, maybe 2 meals, depending on how long it's taking them to shed. And then illness. That's another thing that you want to look for first in your snake. If they're starting to refuse food on a regular basis, or if they just refuse food and they normally don't, check their eyes, check their mouth, check for signs of respiratory infection, signs of mouth rot, signs of scale rot, anything that would make them feel uncomfortable. Scale rot doesn't necessarily have to do with them eating, but if they don't, that might make their belly feel uncomfortable and they're not going to eat. Well, that one you can probably read pretty well. Wrong food. As mentioned in my last video, my big 1,800 gram breeder pied female is a mouser. If I offer her rats, she will not eat. She only eats mice right now. I'm going to change her over, hopefully, but right now she only eats mice. So, you could have a snake that eats rats for a while and then all of a sudden they stop eating. You might offer them a mouse. We're going to talk about ways to get snakes to eat again, but that's one of them, is you offer them a different food that, or let's say you buy a new snake and the breeder tells you that they're on rats. The breeder may have only fed them white rats and you go to feed them a black one or one that's spotted or whatever and they don't take it. And it's because of the color. It's such a weird thing. I've never had it happen to me, but I've seen it happen to enough people and I've heard about it enough that I know that it's relatively common that snakes will have a preference of color in their prey item, which I think is kind of crazy and funny. Not hungry. Are you trying to offer your snake food every 3 days? They may not be ready to eat. Even if you're offering every 5 days, some snakes aren't ready to eat. Now, there are also plenty of ball pythons that will eat every time you offer, and you can, feed them to death, and you shouldn't. But if you're trying to offer your snake every 3 days, 5 days, whatever, a lot of times they're like, whoa, no, I'm not going to eat. So space out those feedings appropriately. Once a week for the smaller snakes and, once every 2 weeks for adults in general. Every 10 to 14 days, something like that. A lot of snakes, if they're not hungry, they won't eat. Even though ball pythons are opportunistic feeders and, they're supposed to just eat whenever the opportunity arises, but that doesn't always happen. And this is a cause for snakes to go off food sometimes. They're not really off food. They're just not hungry yet. You haven't given them a chance to decide that they want to eat. Of these new pins that I got, I feel like blue, yellow, and green are the best. Breeding season. This is another one that you have to be careful about. If you have an adult ball python and they go off of food, let's say you have a new adult ball python, so they're 2 years old if they're a male, 3 years old if they're a female, something like that, or not even like a year old if they're a male. They're just becoming sexually mature. Whatever season they decide it is, and it's breeding season, they could potentially go off food, whether you're breeding them or not. However, that's another one of those things. It's almost like saying, well, it's a ball python and they go off food. So you really should rule out every other possibility before you decide that they're off of food because of breeding season. So this is one you have to be careful about. There are probably others that I haven't thought of, and if you have a reason that a snake could go off food that I didn't cover here, put it down in the comments so that we can compile an even bigger list. But the last one on the list here is political protest or religious custom. That is when you've exhausted all the other possibilities and your snake is just on a fast. It's going to be one of these two reasons, and you'll never know. It's a ball python. You're not going to know if it's political or religious in nature. But the fact is, they're fasting and they'll go back on food when they decide to go back on food. But never jump to this conclusion because somebody told you, oh, it's a ball python, that's what they do. It's not what they do. There's always a reason for it. Sometimes we never find the reason, and that's what it ends up being. But we keep trying, and there's a million different ways, not a million, but there's a lot of different ways that you can try to get your snake to eat, and we're going to talk about that right now. Wait, what about Kent's Corner? Right, I'm sorry, Kent. I almost forgot. Kent's been studying what ball pythons eat in the wild, so I'm excited to see what you learned. Let's cut to a Kent's Corner and find out. Hi, welcome to the corner. Kent's Corner. Well, hi, welcome to Kent's Corner. I'm Kent, and that's the corner. I'm here to talk to you about what ball pythons eat in the wild. Ball pythons eat in the wild rats and African soft furs, local villagers, mice, small birds, bats, and other mammalians and forest creatures, like probably a shrew or a monkey and maybe a goat. And they ravage the land, killing everything in sight. And you want to keep them as a pet? This has been Kent's Corner with Kent, featuring me, Kent. Thanks, Kent. That was some good information up front, except for the local villagers part. And then it seemed like you were making stuff up at the end, and then it really went south. Also, they eat students. That's why some kids in Africa are homeschooled. Facts. Let's talk about some tricks that you can do to get your ball python back on food if they're off. First of all, fix whatever husbandry problems you've figured out or health issues or anything like that we talked about before. And now let's talk about little tricks. Just in general, when I feed my ball pythons, and you've heard me talk about this before if you've seen my other videos, especially my last one, but I want to repeat it. I use a hairdryer to warm. I'm warming up the rodent in warm water to start off with in a plastic baggie. But then when I pull them out of that, I'm warming them further on their head with a hairdryer. And this isn't going to work for people with 100 snakes, but if you have 100 snakes, you probably have a system down that works for you. But for a relatively small amount of snakes, you can take a hairdryer on each one and warm the head up on that rodent and direct the air toward the tub or the enclosure or whatever. And that's going to fill the enclosure with the smell of the rodent. If your snake is hungry at all, willing to eat at all, they'll come out of their hide looking for food. They'll do it in the middle of the day. One of the tricks is going to be to feed at night. That's not really a trick. That's just something, they're going to hunt at night in general. They're sleeping during the day. But I feed a lot of my snakes in the middle of the day. I can feed them in the morning. It doesn't matter because when they smell that mouse, they're awake and they're awake and they're hunting. So that's just a good way to get them in feed mode, is make their enclosure smell like the rodent. Also, if you're doing that thing that a lot of people say to do, and it works really well, which is thaw your frozen thawed rodents out just all day in the room and let that smell be in the room, they'll smell that and they'll know that there are rodents around. But if you still do the hairdryer trick and blast a whole bunch of scent into the enclosure, they'll come out right then because it seems like there's a rodent right there. So it's a really important thing to get your ball pythons ready to go. You never want to lift up a hide and wake them up by bopping a rodent on their head or something. You want them to know that it's feeding time. I have my handy dandy clipboard here, my Green Room Pythons clipboard. By the way, if you're interested in a sticker pack, there's information in all of, or most of my videos now on how to get a sticker pack in the description below. You just send a donation to the channel. $5 covers the cost of these, and then send me your address and I'll get them out to you. These white stickers will last while supplies last, but you all tend to like the black ones better. So right now, everybody gets all of these, including the baby sticker, which is a bonus sticker. These go while supplies last, but I ordered like 100 of them, so there's a lot left still. So these I'll be giving for a while. There's probably 20 left of these at this point. So if you order some now, you'll get these white ones. All right. So I'm just going to go through this list. This is all the things I sat down and just thought about a bunch of ways to get your snake to eat. Some of them are tricks that I've used, and some of them are tricks that I've heard from other people that are reputable, that have worked. So let's talk about them. All right, here's one that's kind of weird that I've never done, but Billy over at Mutation Creation told me this. We had a long phone conversation once, and we were talking about, I don't know how we got on this subject because I wasn't having a problem with the snake not eating at the time, but Billy said take your snake for a drive, and I've heard other people do that too, and it works. It's just like moving the snake around. I don't know what it is, but you take them for a drive, you bring them back, put them in their enclosure, and feed them. And a lot of times that will kickstart their feeding. So give that a try. And let me know if that works for you, or if you've done it in the past. Let me know, if it worked or not. Some of these are going to work like a charm, and some of them are not going to work. That's why we have all these different ones. Oh, if you've just upgraded them and they stopped eating, it's because they don't feel secure enough. Put them back in the smaller tub. On that same lines, moving your tub. If you've got a rack of tubs, switching them from one place to another works for some people. Again, that's not one that I've tried before. But, moving your enclosures around just to give them a little something different sometimes works. But if you have just upgraded and they stopped eating, put them back in their other enclosure. Also, just little things like substrate change. Change the substrate up and see if that works. Or if you just change substrate, if you just did any change and they stopped eating, that's probably why they stopped. So go back to whatever you were doing before. Switch up the prey. We already touched on this a little bit, but if they're off of food, if they've been eating rats and they've been refusing, give them a mouse. Give them a gerbil. Don't give them a gerbil over and over, because those are expensive and hard to find. But if you can find one, or if you can take a rat and scent it with gerbil or mouse bedding, that a lot of times works. So either literally giving them the other prey, or scenting the rat so it just smells different. That oftentimes works. Once they've taken that new prey, like a mouse or a gerbil or an ASF, once they've taken that, there's a good chance that the next week you can just give them a regular rat and they'll take that again. They'll be back on food. And again, I mentioned this in my last video, but feeding a snake a mouse one time doesn't get them hooked on mice. It's feeding them continuously over and over a mouse. You're in danger of getting them hooked on it. But and same with gerbils, ASFs. One feeding to get them back on food isn't going to hook them on that prey item. Try a different color. If you've got a whole bunch of white rats and they're refusing them, try a black rat. That could do it, or a spotted one, or whatever. Okay, let's talk about scenting them to get them to strike. We already talked about rolling them in the bedding of some other type of rodent. But, people mention braining, which sounds really gross, and it kind of is, but it's not as gross as it sounds. Braining is basically exposing a little bit of the brain of the rat, and for some reason, a lot of times they'll go for that scent. And I've done it before. And here's how to do it where it's not gross. Take a little X-Acto knife. You're not doing anything disgusting. You're just making like a V slit with an X-Acto knife on the top of the rat's head. Nothing comes out really. Nothing gross happens. You're just making that V slit, and it exposes that to the air, and apparently there's a scent that they can pick up on, and it causes them to strike. Again, it's pretty gross, but not nearly as gross as it sounds. Just do it with a little knife and just make a couple of slits. No big deal. So that's one way that's kind of scenting. It's bringing the brain scent into the equation. So another way of scenting is vanilla, and this just worked for me last week. Austin at Mutation Creation mentioned this in a video, I think fairly recently. You may have seen it, where they were feeding their snakes, and he just kind of casually mentioned that they're putting like a drop of vanilla on the head of their inconsistent feeders, and that helps. So I thought that I would give it a try with Ron. Now Ron is my new snake. I've had him for a couple weeks now, and he has only eaten live feeders in the past. He's about 1.5 years old, and he's only eaten live before, and I want him on frozen thawed. So his first meal with me was alive, because I always do that. I feed the snake whatever they were eating before, and if they eat, then we start working on switching them over. So what I did is, a couple days before I fed him the live, or maybe the day before, I had warmed up a frozen thawed to feed to one of my other snakes, and I wanted to see if he would even have a reaction. So I scented his tub with it, and there wasn't really a reaction with the scent. And then I gently put it in there, like I didn't tease him with it or anything, but I gently put it in there, and there was no reaction. Like it wasn't food to him. So the next day I put a live in there, and he took it no problem. So what I decided to do a week later, and this was just a couple days ago, is take a frozen thawed, warm it up, put a drop of vanilla on the head and see if that works. And it totally worked. He went right for it. So that's, I didn't expect it to work. I kind of thought that was kind of an outlandish thing to do, but, you know, I trust Austin has great stuff. If you guys aren't following Mutation Creation and Austin's, I wish I knew off the top of my head what his channel is. But anyway, really great channels. So that worked. My next thought was going to be to try chicken broth. I've been hearing a lot of people do the same thing. They put a few drops of chicken broth, or they're saying that they're dunking the head in chicken broth, whatever. And that works really well. That's one that I haven't tried, but it's what I thought was more likely to work than, you know, vanilla versus chicken broth. There's a company, this isn't a sponsorship, and I've never tried it, but other people have, and apparently it works pretty well. It's a company called Reptilinks that sell meat links for, not necessarily for ball pythons. I don't think that they would take those very easily, more for lizards and stuff like that. But they have a line of little scent bottles, and one of them is African soft fur scent. So you can, or they call it African soft fur juice, I think. It's just the scent of an ASF, and you can pop that on the head of a rat and see if they'll take that. I was going to get some to try to, when I have hatchlings, I want to try to start them off on rats, and I might use that ASF juice and see if hatchlings will be more likely to take a rat if it's got that ASF juice on it. I'm going to try. I think I don't even have eggs yet, but I will. When those hatchlings come, I think I'm going to try frozen thawed rats as a first meal. I know that that's not an easy route to go, but I'm going to give it a try. There are some breeders who do it very successfully. Most who say, give them a live mouse, but we'll see. I'm going to try it with the ASF juice is the point. This is one that works really well for me. If your snake doesn't eat the rat when you offer it to them, put it on a plate and leave it there overnight. I have two snakes that eat that way. One that consistently eats that way. Another one that sometimes strikes and sometimes doesn't. But some snakes are just shy eaters, and there are some snakes that don't need the pretense of pretending that it's alive. They don't need to strike and wrap. So my big girl, Damara, almost always eats like that. I just take a little Tupperware lid and put her rat or rats on that lid, and they're gone the next morning. Freya, who's my other big girl, will oftentimes strike and wrap, but if she doesn't, I know that I can leave the rat in there and it'll be gone in the morning. So you might find out that your snake eats that way or prefers to eat that way. So leave the rodent in overnight. If they didn't eat it in the morning, just pull it out and throw it away. If you're offering your snake each week and they're refusing week after week, stop offering every week. Give them 2 or even 3 weeks off of where they don't even see a rodent. And a lot of times the fact that a rodent hasn't come into their tub or their enclosure recently, a lot of times they'll eat because all of a sudden they have the opportunity to eat. So that's one that you can do mixed with any of these other techniques to try to get them to eat, is just give them time off of not even offering. And it's important to know that a snake is probably not going to starve themselves. That's really rare. So, and a snake can go for a very long time without eating. There are snakes that have gone, over a year without eating, and then all of a sudden they'll kick back in. That's not common. It's usually, several months, but you can go 5 months. Lucille, my pied girl, went 5 months without eating, and then started eating again, and she was just fine. She lost hardly any weight, maybe 100 grams. So you do want your snakes to be eating regularly, but if they're off food for a little while, it's not the end of the world. You have time to figure it out, and you have time to work with them and try to get them to eat. But the important point that I want to make is, don't say that it's just that they're ball pythons and ball pythons go off food, and don't immediately jump to breeding season and using that as the excuse. Because you could go 6 months and say it's breeding season for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you realize they have some disease or something that you didn't check into. What are other techniques that I didn't mention? I'd love to have a list of techniques. a list of reasons why snakes could potentially go off food, and a list of techniques that weren't mentioned in this video in the comment section, so that people can just sort of go through and add to the list that I talked about. So what do you guys have? Pop it down in the comments. All right, we did it. I think we've covered in 2 videos about as much as I can cover about feeding. So Kent, do you want to do a sign off for us? Basically, all the animals in Africa live in fear of snakes. And you want to invite them into your home? You know what? I think I'll take over on the sign off, Kent. Thank you. Folks, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and you want to take half a second to hit the like button, that's fantastic, but no pressure. If you enjoy these videos and you haven't subscribed yet, again, no pressure, but hit the subscribe button if you want to do that. Leave your comments. I always answer comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.